Can you say anything about your bloodline? You said you were hybridized. In what way?
Okay, this is two very different questions. About my bloodline. Well, I am a surrogate. I am part of Project Moonshadow. I'm a Moonshadow baby. So my parents here are not my biological parents, but their bloodlines are the Rothschilds, the Menzies clan, which is a Scottish clan that is the rival to the Stuart clan, and the Visigoths, who were, of course, the Spanish royalty. So that's that. My biological family, I know very little. I only ever knew my biological father. He was a very cryptic and mysterious man. The one name of his that he ever used that I've been able to, that is searchable, was Carl Emmerman, and Emmerman is a very significant name in the projects, so probably that might be his original surname. I'm not sure who all they're descended from. I believe I remember him one time mentioning Habsburgs, and also the royalty of Switzerland, back when Switzerland had a monarchy, which was an awfully long time ago. And in what way was I hybridized? It was in utero. I was infused with DNAs of ETs. I know Draco DNA and Naga DNA and Zeta Reticulans, probably even more than those, and that I'm probably a cocktail, and I actually probably have very little Terran human DNA, but that's what I know.
Okay, let's go to the music topic. What can you say as an introduction to this?
Well, okay, where would I begin? I guess I could say that music writing was how we survived day to day at Camp Hero. It was our only normal bit in this place that we were at. And it was also encouraged. And what would happen was someone would write a song, record it, and the project heads would take it and sell it to a music company who would then give it over to a musician in the mainstream. After adjusting it so that the frequency was different. We had good frequencies in our music. They would turn our songs on their heads for the most part, so that they had negative control frequencies for mind controlling the population. The two biggest companies who our music was sold to were Capitol Records and one with a very similar name but not quite, Capitol Artists United. Capitol Records is USA based. Capitol Artists United is Hong Kong based. A great deal of our songs were translated into Chinese, or, well, Cantonese and Mandarin Chinese, and sold through Capitol Artists United for the Asian market, so that, I guess, making it less likely that the rest of us would find them whenever they eventually had to send us back to our lives. But there are a great many English songs, and I'm sure songs in many other languages that are also written there. Many of the classics of classic rock or classic love songs, I guess you could say, were written there. There were a number of iconic musicians, quite a number of iconic musicians from history who were at Camp Hero, particularly Janis Joplin, who I've talked about quite often in my interviews. Let's see who else. John Denver, Danny Chan, who is or was a very iconic singer in the canto pop genre. And oftentimes we would also sell the songs to musicians ourselves. One of us, oftentimes me, but there were other people who did it, would dress up in a suit and portal into somewhere, usually the dressing room or something of one of these musicians, play them the record and sell it to them, telling them that we were the devil and that they were selling their souls. This is a well-known phenomena in the music industry, is a man in a gray suit who said he was the devil and that they sold their soul to the devil for beautiful songs and fame. They were not selling their soul to the devil. They were selling their soul to the projects, and so by doing that they consented to being used, and I'm sure probably all of the ones who took that deal were and are in use. Alright, that's about all I can say. Well, I can list off some iconic songs that were written there. Stand By Me by Ben E. King. Along Stream and Countercurrent is the English translation, roughly, of the Chinese song, which is quite well known. It was sung by Paula Choi in the 80s. You Belong to Me by the Duprees. Mr. Sandman, Bring Me a Dream by the Chordettes, and a great many others.
Alright, the first question one would ask is how would you even think to write songs in that environment? How did you get into the creative state?
It was kind of just, how do I put it? You would arrive there naturally through circumstance. You would be, your brain would, I'm trying to think of how I'm going to word this. Music was played constantly, so it was a constant feature in your life. You would hear it everywhere you went in the compound. And you would hear about other people writing music, and people, when they're under extreme stress, oftentimes do go into a creative state sometimes. And so I guess you just naturally got there through the environment, which was constructed to encourage it.
I assume people writing the songs were the children who had talent, or was anyone encouraged to do it?
Anyone was. My alter, who wrote the most music there, was an adult the entire time. Kyle, again, a lot of stuff we'll get into when we're talking about him, but if we ever do. But no, anyone was encouraged to, and most people did.
Did they have music lessons or music projects for you to stimulate creativity?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. There were music lessons. You were encouraged to take music lessons, and there were people there who taught them. Yeah, that was a thing. I remember there was actually quite a large music school, and some extremely accomplished trainers there from across space and time who they had gone in and grabbed. Yes.
Also, one would wonder why they used a black project like that to produce music instead of just ordering or sourcing it within the industry.
I think, again, because of the frequency thing. I've sometimes wondered that myself, but I think, again, from the frequency thing, and also it was another way to torture us by having us write these incredible songs, but then turning them on their heads and selling them, and, it furthered the dehumanization of us, because even the songs that we wrote while we were in a state of heartbreak or trauma were not our own. And again, the frequency output by it would carry with it a bit of the frequency from where it had come from, and how that all works, I don't know exactly. You'd need to find an expert in quantum mechanics or something to tell you how exactly that works, but that was the reason why, as far as I can tell.
Can you give an example of how music changed? How were the pop versions supposed to affect the audience?
They would oftentimes speed it up, make it louder, oftentimes completely change the style. There were a number of songs that I personally wrote that were changed in genre completely. They were written by me as like dark, contemplative rock music, but they became country songs. And they would often just ruin them in many ways, give them to mediocre singers, in my opinion. And how were they supposed to affect the audience? They're supposed to increase mind control at a societal level, is how they were altered.
Did you find any of the songs that you wrote in the here and now?
Absolutely, yes. There were many that I've written and heard now that are now quite famous. Sweet Child of Mine, 月亮代表我的心, Dream a Little Dream of Me, Shelter from the Storm, and several others. that are, a lot of them were sold to the Chinese industry for the Chinese market, or well, to the Hong Kong industry, I should say, because they didn't really have pop music in China in the 60s and 70s very much, but in mainland China, but in Hong Kong and Taiwan, yes. So the Canto Pop and Mando Pop of Taiwan, and there were a great many that I wrote. A lot of them that I've found were written by Kyle, not by Alex, so they're not within the scope of this conversation.
Can you describe the experience of when you recognized the song or songs that you knew were from Montauk? What specific lyrics pointed to them being from Montauk? And maybe name some examples.
Well, the first few times I would go, that after I became aware of this phenomenon from my memories and all that, was I would go into shock when I heard it. I don't do that anymore. Nowadays I expect it, because there were just so many. I can't say that there are any specific lyrics as such, although sometimes you would hear things that are referenced to like time or traveling through space that seem a bit odd and out of place in a song. The giveaway usually is the style. Usually, even if they've changed the genre, it's still kind of melancholy, and there are no wind instruments ever in Montauk songs. I have yet to find one that had a wind instrument, that has a wind instrument in it, in its original version. Maybe people have gone and changed it. Maybe people who've covered it have done so with a wind instrument, but the original recording, studio recording by whatever artist it was sold to first, will never have a wind instrument in it. Let's see, name as many as you want. Oh gosh, I could go on and on. Mr. Sandman, Bring Me a Dream. That one is about someone who, their call sign was Sandman and they died. Let's see, Rocket Man by Elton John. I know that one was originally written by Marilyn Monroe. This is a very personal one, but to me, but Home to You by Sigrid, and many, many others that I'm just drawing a blank on the name. I have two playlists on my YouTube channel that you can link that are, one is lists of songs stolen from me, one is lists of songs stolen from others, and you can link them. They're not even complete. I've found others, but I just haven't had the time or the inclination to include them yet.
You named Janis Joplin. She officially died a mysterious death in October of 1970. Was she in Montauk before 1970 or after? Was she taken on a time loop? Was her death connected to Montauk? When and how did she leave Montauk that you remember? What songs do you remember her write?
Whew, lots of questions. Okay. She arrived in 1970, but then they sent her back in time to an earlier period of the project. You know, you have to discard linear time completely when you're talking about this subject. So, I guess she arrived in 1970, but she was there before then because, again, they sent her back through time. Let's see. Was she taken there on a time loop? Not that I know of, no. She was just taken there, I believe, as far as I can tell. Was her death connected to Montauk? Yes, it was an extraction. It was not a death. Well, I guess probably she did die, but she was taken and regened on the other, at Camp Hero immediately. She was not dead for more than a couple of hours, if she was even dead at all, and they didn't just take it, just put a dead clone there in her place and take her. When and how did she leave Montauk that you remember? She left in 2014 after the Draco invasion. We can get into that again if we ever do shows on Kyle. How she left, she just left. The option was there and she took it. And so she's still out in space and still doing stuff. She's nowhere near dead, and she won't be for probably, I don't know, the average lifespan in the breakaway is about 900 years, so she has a very long way to, a very long way to go. What songs do you remember her writing? Okay. A lot of these, again, are from Kyle's era, but I know that a lot of the songs by Electric Light Orchestra were written by her, or that were sold to Electric Light Orchestra were written by her. Yeah, The Way Life's Meant to Be, Evil Woman, just songs by Electric Light Orchestra. A lot of them were written by her. She also wrote What a Wonderful World, that was sold to Louis Armstrong, and also Mr. Sandman, which I mentioned earlier, because it was about her trauma twin. His call sign was Sandman, because when they picked him up, he was building a sandcastle. Of all the reasons for him to have that name.
Can you name the musicians who offered to sell their soul for fame? Those who accepted and those who refused? If they accepted, what did this pact with the devil entail for them? What was done if they refused to deal with you? Did you use any special effects or tech so that your devil gig would convince them it was really supernatural?
The three I can name for certain are Louis Armstrong, Ella Fitzgerald, and Leonard Cohen. They all accepted this deal. What did the pact with the devil entail for them? It entailed that they were selling their soul to the project for use forever, the same as the rest of us, and I'm sure someone would then go and time travel into their childhoods and start using them from the age that we had all been used from, and continue from there. And what was done if they refused to deal with you? Nothing. You would go away for a while and then approach them again at a later date. It was pretty simple, and eventually they would accept. At least all the ones I did accepted. Any special effects or tech used for the devil to convince them it was supernatural? Well, people in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, walking through a portal was pretty supernatural. And I would communicate with them telepathically, which was a complete unknown idea to people in that era. And the tech used, the only tech I remember using other than the portal to walk in was, I would have them sign the contract on a glass pad, which again, that kind of technology would have appeared very magical to someone in the 1930s. Yeah, that's what I remember.
Why do you still do it? Why are you still out here?
Well, it goes back to the destiny thing. I made a bargain with it, a long time ago, and I'm holding up my end.
What was your bargain?
To get where I am now.
Should I ask who you made the bargain with?
with the chief commander.
On this earth?
And on this earth, and then in a world we can't see.
Now, about the time aspect, do you find that the songs written at Montauk at one time ended up in other eras, back or forward in time? And if yes, can you name a couple?
Okay, plenty of them. Let's see, Somewhere Over the Rainbow is one that sticks out. That song was written, I believe, in the early to mid 1980s, but it wound up in 1939. Most of them wound up earlier than when they had supposedly been written, so that I guess if any of us ever came forward and said, I wrote such and such song in the 1980s, people could point to it and say, no, this song is from the 1930s, or whatever. And, let's see, name a few more. Gosh, there's so many. At Last, which was sung by Etta James. I believe she released that in the early to mid 60s. That song was actually written in 1975. And some of them were not released until decades later as well, such as Home to You by Sigrid that I mentioned earlier. That was released in 2010 or so, I think, but it was written in the 70s, or maybe even late 60s. No, 70s, 74. The only one that I know was released about on time with when it was written is The Sound of Silence, which was written by a gentleman who I'm sure we'll talk about soon, who was a gunnery sergeant, Stanley Mulgrave, who was one of the people who came into the camp with me on that first night in '63.
Now, about the space aspect, were any of the songs sold to space colonies or just performed in space? Did any of the singers perform in the colonies? And if yes, who and where? Did any of the singers later end up in the colonies after having supposedly died on Earth?
Sold to space colonies, yes, absolutely. A lot of the songs sung by Anita Moy were either are from the space colonies or were sold to them. You know, again, you have to discard linear time, and so with linear time discarded, I don't know which came first. But a lot of the Cantopop songs I found are ones I remember from space. Did any of the singers perform in the colonies? If yes, who and where? Well, Anita Moy, again, like I just mentioned, I remember her singing at a club on the planet Centurion called the Wild Blue Yonder. John Denver would also perform at that same place in concert with her, and still is, I believe. Both of them, I believe, still perform there, at least the last time I checked. I remember a Janis Joplin concert on New Atlantis in 1969. I don't know if it was our 1969 because every planet had its own calendar. So it could have been 1969 for them. Because, you know, planets have different orbital periods, they have different numbers of hours in a day, you know. So I don't know if it was our 1969 or not, but that was where she performed Hallelujah. I heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord. That song, and which was a life-changing experience for me even just when I remembered that, let alone when I was actually there. It was quite remarkable the way that she sang that song, and it's a crime that this planet has no access to her rendition of it. Did any of the singers later end up in the colonies after having supposedly died on Earth? I'm sure probably all of them did. At least huge amounts of them. Huge amounts of them. I could just name a few. Well, we talked about Janis Joplin, Danny Chan, Teresa Ting, let's see, what's his name, Jimi Hendrix, probably all the members of the 27 Club, because the 27 is a number that's wholly in the worship of Moloch, which, that's Moloch is a whole other subject, but the 27 Club members, as far as I know, are all still alive, and they're still performing in space. Let's see. Oh, one other performance I could point out was on Mars in 1983, I believe, when Janis, she's quite prominent in my memories, she performed the song Mr. Blue Sky, which is now an Electric Light Orchestra song. She performed it on Mars to commemorate the end of a particularly brutal sandstorm season, and she sang it with a 200-piece a cappella choir. It was quite remarkable, yeah. I guess that about answers that.
You mentioned the New Atlantis colony. Where is it located?
New Atlantis, I don't know. It's on a tropical planet orbiting a white dwarf. It may not even be somewhere that's been charted, because white dwarfs are actually quite hard to spot, even with the most advanced telescopes. It might not be anywhere that's been charted by.
Were any of the famous music producers ever seen at Camp Hero, or even worked there? And who was in charge of the music project at the base?
I couldn't tell you if they were famous or not. I've never researched music producers, to be quite honest with you. If I were to look them up, find the more well-known ones, I'm sure I would recognize some of them. But there were music producers who would come in there. They weren't assets as such. They just were there to make a deal, to decide to find songs that they decided they wanted funneled into their company to increase their own wealth and fame. Let's see. Who was in charge of the music project at the base? No one in particular, really. It was just kind of an organic thing that happened, is the only way I can describe it. People writing songs and recording them, you were required to record them. If you wrote a song, you were required to go to the studio that we had there and record them, and then they would take them away, take the recordings and sell them, and the asset had no say in it whatsoever.
Okay, three names: Elvis, John Lennon, and Michael Jackson.
I have no doubt about Elvis. I know that some of his songs were stolen. I have a specific memory, actually, of his song. What is it? Can't Help Falling in Love with You. I know that's a Montauk song, so he's definitely mixed up in all this. John Lennon, Marilyn, Michael Jackson. I have heard people. I have met people who said they've seen Michael Jackson face. Yes. The other ones I don't know specifically about, but I wouldn't doubt it.
Okay, in closing, let's talk about some of the songs that you mentioned. What was that song you wrote while being on a mission during the Orion Wars?
This was when myself and two other men were sent back during the Orion Wars, to the Bellatrix system, to the second most populated planet in that system, Bellatrix Secunda. And we were protecting a young girl who would eventually become an anti-Draco resistance leader. That could be a whole story unto itself, but for a while, as we were guarding her, we holed up in a mountain village somewhere. And one thing Bellatrix is known for is its music. So we started writing music. We were surrounded by it. We had been at Camp Hero, of course, and we were still when we got there, so it was just kind of the natural thing we would. We wrote an entire album. We called it Sunsets on Tiamat. And I know someone in the Breakaway, no one on Earth, sadly, but there is someone in the Breakaway who has it still. But the one song I've been able to concretely find that is now fairly well known, that was originally part of it, was called Wild West Hero. It's now sung by Electric Light Orchestra. And yeah, it's a very emotional song about, like, wanting a simpler life and being able to escape and blah blah blah, all the things that Montauk kids go to sleep at night to this day dreaming about.
Now, the one iconic song that I have to ask you about is The Sound of Silence. Can you talk about how it was written?
Sound of Silence is about a dystopian possible future. A couple of people have talked about this actually, but there is a future where people worship an AI, and not like a benevolent AI, because there are plenty of benevolent AIs. This is like the AI that the Zeta Reticulans worship / have been taken over by, that hive minds everything. Although, of course, humans are not genetically wired for a hive mind, so it's more like very extreme forced conformity in this future. And The Sound of Silence is about that. It was written by a guy who died, a lost boy, by the name of Gunnery Sergeant Stan Mulgrave. And he was actually a Solar Warden liaison into Montauk for a while, and then I think he fully joined in, maybe. It's very fuzzy, really. A lot of it is, but he was a good man, and he was a friend of mine. He wrote and first performed The Sound of Silence just maybe a month or so before his death, which was itself not very long before Alex was kicked out. It was in, I guess, summer or late spring or early summer of '74. I think. I want to say it was in... Gosh, you know what it was? It was in May, so today is, to the month, this is exactly 50 years after that. I had not even thought of that. That's crazy. So that's that. The story behind that.
Now, the super iconic Chinese song, The Moon Represents My Heart, that everybody in China and Asia knows. Was it written by Alex?
Okay, no. The Moon Represents My Heart was not written by Alex. It was written by Heinrich. Can I briefly say how it was written? Okay. There is also a Japanese version out there. You can find it, although it's on YouTube, so you could just look up "The Moon Represents My Heart," Japanese. It's far less common than the Chinese version, but at any rate, the Japanese version is in fact the original, even though it was released on Earth later. How it was written for Heinrich's high school sweetheart, who was an Arasaka. They went to the same school, very, very, very prestigious boarding school on Vega Prime. That's a whole story unto itself. But anyways, so yeah, he wrote that for her.
What about the Chinese song that is in the intro to this interview series, The Fated Love in the Next Life?
Lai Xingyuan, okay. That's kind of a sad story. That's one of the ones that Alex's trauma twin Melanie wrote when he was leaving Montauk. She wrote several. They both wrote several. And by the way, it was not written in Cantonese. It was written in French. So the Cantonese version is a translation, but it's the same song, very obviously.
Okay, another amazing song is Cosmic Blues by Janis Joplin. She actually sang it in the Here and Now while she was alive. So do you think it was connected to Montauk?
Okay, I don't have a specific memory of it, but having listened to it after you mentioned it, I would be absolutely shocked if it wasn't. There is a very, very specific sound to Montauk songs that they're usually recognizable. Not always, but usually. They have a certain type of rhythm or certain type of musical quality to them. They usually have very few or no wind instruments except possibly a harmonica or possibly a saxophone. Wind instruments were just about banned from Montauk musicians. So yeah, that's how you can usually tell.
Alright, and finally, What a Wonderful World. I know that this song has to do with the Montauk history.
What a Wonderful World was written by Janis Joplin again in 1986 after the Junior incident when everything seemed really full of hope and all of that, and it was about, what a wonderful world we actually live in, how wonderful the world looks when we don't have these oppressive forces and all of that all around us. Okay, yeah, that's basically the story of that song.